So welcome and thank you for taking the time to join us today. I'm Kevin McElhaney from Digital Promise. I'll be the main facilitator for the webinar. The main focus of this webinar will be on how we as an OpenSciEd community can support OpenSciEd practitioners' needs and about OpenSciEd's potential impacts on science education broadly. Oh, and let's see, I think I have control over the slides. There we go. Okay, here's our agenda. Jim Ryan of OpenSciEd will kick things off in a minute with some framing remarks, and then I'll give a quick summary of the report on practitioner needs that we recently released. Then each of our 4 panelists will give about a 5-minute perspective on the report's findings. And then finally, the panelists plus Jim will respond interactively to some questions we've prepared to go a little deeper into the issues raised in the report. So please feel free to use the chat to pose and respond to comments and questions as they come up. It'll be good to get a little conversation going in there. Here are our distinguished panelists. We have Angela DeBarger, Kate McNeill, Trish Shelton, and Holly Sullivan. I'll introduce them when it's their time to give a perspective. And thanks to all of them for carving out the time to be here and share their insights with us. And we'll hear more from them in about 20 minutes or so. And now I'm really pleased to welcome Jim Ryan, Executive Director of OpenSciEd, who probably does not need any further introduction from this audience. So I'll just hand it right over to Jim.
Thanks, Kevin. One, I just want to thank Digital Promise for hosting this event, and also thanking those attending and my fellow panelists for being here. I look forward to learning from all of you today. So my comments are just going to be a brief kind of current state of where OpenSciEd and why what I'm talking about matters for this community. One of the things well, when we started this effort, we talked about how OpenSciEd, yes, you need products associated with new standards and to change practice. All of that that's true. But that practice we were trying to redefine what counts as learning of science, and get away from the traditional science learning is about vocabulary, new vocabulary, and facts being told to students. And anytime they do anything hands-on, it's just to simply reinforce what they've already read or been told. But and rather make learning of science very much the students behaving themselves as scientists, that they are intrigued by a phenomenon that then becomes the driver behind their learning, that it is their own questions and noticings that are given value in the classroom and investigated. So in order to redefine what science instruction looks like across the country, you actually to have that kind of impact, you need to be, it only counts if the materials are in students' hands. And so impact of what we're trying to do is directly proportional to our ability to get these materials into students' hands. Historically, when you look at innovative materials, they're such as the NSF curricula of the 90s and 2000s, those materials got a lot of press. Everyone talked about them, but at the end of the day, only 4 to 6% of the students actually experienced them. And we are trying to change that paradigm. And so as we embark upon this, we have to look at, are we being successful not only in how the materials look in the classroom, but how many classrooms are they impacting? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And I also want to put a pin in the word, I've always talked about redefining what science learning looks like. And this, the report made me reconsider that term, and we'll be talking about that in a couple of slides. But so how have these materials impacted classrooms, and how many materials have they impacted? And so I'll talk about how we approach the market differently than other products do. Historically, materials sit within a publisher that have exclusive rights to distribute them to schools, and they have deployed their own marketing and sales force and to do so. We are trying to both play into that procurement process in which distributors use their sales and marketing efforts to present to district committees that are established, the distribute free sample materials, have free pilots, those types of things that have to be done to get into institutional adoptions, but also be disruptive in a way in that we give them the materials away freely available. So what we were doing is creating an ecosystem in which there's freely available materials and there's materials that live broadly, that are derivatives of the freely available materials, because our distributors are adding their own capital and putting value added elements into the original program. So if you have the OER version, that OER version is freely available to download at OpenSciEd in multiple forms, such as Google Classroom, PDFs, both screen and print ready, Google Docs, so that you can adapt them and make them your own. And if you're going to teach them, you actually need the stuff of a classroom. You need the hands-on materials. And so we are trying to lower the barriers to the use of these materials by having a set of providers who you can buy the kits from, and you can choose from a variety of them, whoever you have a trusting relationship with. Along with that, if you want printed books, we have a low-cost printer. If you want professional learning, we not only provide professional learning, but we have a network of over 35 professional learning providers that can support you at your school, with the idea that you should go to who you have a trusting relationship with. You don't need to go to a point source for your professional learning. And so if you've got a great relationship with, and if you're in Massachusetts with Boston College and Kate, then they can provide that service. If you're in New Jersey and you work closely with the Liberty Science Center in the past, great. They are a certified provider. But in this way that we make it so that you can access the materials at lower cost and still get high quality products and services. In addition, if you want to go through a typical publisher type experience where they provide everything, the professional learning, the products, the online access to their proprietary platform, we have a variety of certified versions. All of these are non-exclusive, and we're adding more as we speak. And each one of these are distinct. So the Carolina version is distinct from the Activate Learning version, and the schools and teachers can make the choices that fit for them. And so this allows us to play in a market in ways that can increase the use, the widespread use, and remove barriers to that use. And so how is that working? Well, we have, because our materials are freely downloadable, we have a leaky information pipeline of exactly where they're used and how they're used. But we do know a few things. We know from all of our professional learning providers where the schools are that they're providing the materials. We do know from all of our kit and full distributors where they've made sales. We do know where we've done professional learning, and we also know the number of teachers that have registered for our materials. And so we have indications of are we finding the success that we were hoping for, the impact in those classrooms. And a couple early indicators of our reach is so our registered users, and this was last month, it's already actually close to 90,000. 90,000 teachers have registered to access the materials. And if you're wondering how that plays into the whole market, there are roughly 70,000 middle grades science teachers in the country, and roughly 100,000 high school teachers. So we're already over half of the entire market that we're trying to reach at this point. We have the middle school, and the full high school program will be out later this month. We don't even have the full high school program out yet. Another indication of our people using the materials is we have all of our phenomena, and as well as some other activities, employs some video, and that video is at our YouTube channel. These are not videos that you're actually going to sit down and watch on a Friday night. If the only reason you would watch these things is if you're teaching the materials. And so when we look at who is accessing, or the number of access or views of these, over 4 million views of the variety of videos. And you can see that it is that the slope is actually increasing here. So we are seeing an increased use of these videos during instruction. And so that's a solid indicator. Another quick indicator is we had an organization called Ed Solutions do a market analysis and with heat maps of where they're seeing uses of OpenSciEd. And what we found was, yes, if those of you who know about our development cycle, we had 10 partner states that we started with, where those partner states drive and continue to drive the vision of the materials, as well as the field testing of these materials. Well, we see heavy usage in those partner states, such as Louisiana and Oklahoma, Washington, California, but we also now see that we are actually a nationwide product now. That when you look at where these materials are used, and this is just looking at the data of our institutional sales, where the sales from our full distributors or our kit providers or professional learning indicate that the either a district or a whole school is using them, and we're starting to see that and we're starting to see uses across the country. And it isn't, and what is encouraging is, yes, California and New York are the darker states because they have higher populations, but we are not a product that only gets play along the coast or in New England. You can see that it is across in the Midwest, across the South, as well as the West Coast and East Coast. So it is very encouraging at this early stage of our having a full product. And so coming back to as we think about what the report told us, and where we offer, because of our reach, an interesting place in which research can be done. I'm struck by my initial term that I've been using, saying that we wanted to redefine science education. And really what the report pointed to was we want to reculture classrooms. And when I talk about reculturing, it's actually making people consider things like, who is the knower of science? Are we all knowers of science? And do we all bring something to the table to discuss about the science that we have? And part of behaving as a scientist is recognizing what you know and what you don't know. recognizing the adequacy of your explanation and thinking about what where it might be lacking, and how we as a collective classroom model our understanding. It's not only my understanding as an individual, but that our ideas as a whole classroom, actually matter. And that is a reculturation. It isn't a redefinition. It's reculturing a classroom. One of the things that in thinking about assessment as a launching point, a story that I heard last month, and it came from a classroom in Massachusetts, was the students were taking a chapter test. Now we call them transfer tests in our units, because we're not only thinking about what do they know, but also how are they going to apply that in the future. And it is not a typical, stop, drop, and test kind of event, but it is an embedded chapter assessment. And students were struggling on understanding what they were being asked in the assessment. And so what the students in the classroom raised their hand and asked the teacher, can we get into a scientist circle and discuss the task in front of us so that we better understand what is being asked of us, and then we'll go back to our desk. And so a scientist circle is a typical strategy in our classroom where the students sit around in a circle and discuss their understanding of the science in front of them. And the teacher looked around and said, "Is that cheating? This is a test. Is that?" And the student's response was, "You taught us how to learn this way. Why would we stop doing that in assessment?" And I love that story because it really gets to the heart of trying to redefine what we mean about learning in a classroom. And so and I think the report does a really good job of talking about how it's actually a reculturation of the classroom. I want to finish on this one piece is it's not only the reculturation of the individual classroom, but it's reculturation of institutions. If we think about the changes that we need to make in the classrooms, and we think about it as we have to think about every individual classroom across the 13,000 districts in this country, the job becomes so overwhelming that it's easy to give up. And really what we should be thinking about is what is the appropriate unit of change that we're all working towards. And that unit of change needs to be bigger than the individual classroom. For us as providers of support for teachers, that unit of change, from my perspective, should be schools and districts, in which teachers see themselves see the teacher across the hallway not as a distraction, but as an asset. And that they are relying on one another and going across the hallway as they think about how they get better as a teacher, and that they stop becoming isolated in their teaching, but thinking about the whole school and eventually a whole district as their support structure. And also eventually as having ownership of the materials, since the materials are adaptable and you can make them work for your context. There's no reason that a school can't sit around and make them work for their own context, but that then takes it off of the individual teacher and puts it on a department or a whole district to do so. So as we listen to our colleagues today, I really wanted to bring forward that reculturation of both the classroom and the institution as a way of meeting our goals, that where students see science as much different than what many of us experience in school. So I'll hand it back to Kevin now.
Thanks so much, Jim. That was a great framing of the report and our agenda today. I'm going to give a quick summary of the report in case you haven't had a chance to look at it. And Kellyanne's going to put a link to the report in the chat, I think. And so let's see. First, I want to acknowledge the people who contributed to this work. This is the Digital Promise team I've had the pleasure of working side by side with, and they're co-authors on the report. Many thanks to our project program committee. They've given us great feedback, connected us with community members, helped us see around corners as we do this work. Great to work with them. And a few others, first and foremost, Jim Short and CCNY for their support of this work for the last 4 years, and especially the vision of how OpenSciEd can advance not only science education in classrooms, but also research. And Jim and the whole OpenSciEd team have been very supportive throughout. I want to thank Bill Penuel at CU Boulder. He's been a great friend to the project. We really appreciate his insights. And of course, all the practitioners who have given us their time and told us their stories so we could bring them to you today. All right, so the goals for this report are to gather and synthesize the perspectives of OpenSciEd practitioners, particularly, so we can identify the most urgent needs, what drives these needs, what kinds of solutions can address them. And we hope these insights point to priority research questions, and further research can shed new light on these issues. We heard from more than 150 practitioners across 34 states. We first identified 22 potential practitioner challenges, and our survey asked how often these challenges were experienced, to describe student groups experiencing equity challenges, and for them to elaborate on 3 challenges in particular that they thought were especially high priority. We also conducted focus group interviews with a subset of the respondents, and each interview focused on 2 themes that came out of the surveys. And we asked participants to describe challenges, identify root causes, and then discuss emerging or potential solutions. A few words on the survey findings. So these are the challenges in our survey that rose up above the others. On the left there, sustaining student engagement was by far named by the most respondents as high priority and experienced most often. And the other ones that were named a lot related to things like classroom culture, like Jim was talking about, assessment, adapting materials, teacher planning and reflection time, and increasing teacher capacity to OpenSciEd at the district level. Another key finding was around the responses to the equity challenges question. Practitioners named 2 student groups over the others in terms of the need for support, students with disabilities and multilingual learners. This finding is very consistent with reports from the middle school field test, and I don't think it's especially unique to OpenSciEd. It speaks to the need to support these student groups with the demands of next generation science in general, which includes a lot of reading, writing, talking, and doing. So I think this defines a really clear area for student and teacher support. I also want to mention that all the other student groups on this graph were named by less than 10% of respondents, which reflects really well on the development team's intentional efforts to make unit phenomena relevant and accessible to all students. This is also consistent with reports from the middle school field test. In analyzing the focus group interviews, there were 3 high-level outcomes that emerged from the conversations. These outcomes were deep and sustained district adoption and implementation, equitable classroom enactment and student engagement, and assessment practices that elicit evidence of NGSS-based learning. And practitioners talked about challenges as obstacles to ultimately achieving one or more of these outcomes. So we represented practitioners' insights in 3 maps, one for each outcome. And I'll show you one of these maps. So this is the one on enabling deep and sustained district adoption and implementation. And the maps show relationships and dependencies among the needs that practitioners mentioned in the surveys and interviews. The arrows represent ways that they said meeting one need can enable the meeting of other needs. So there's kind of a left to right flow to these maps, with the more foundational needs on the left and more specific ones toward the right. I don't want to go into the weeds on every box right now. I hope you'll do that on your own as you read the report. But I do want to call attention to the broad themes that emerged here, which are represented by the two colors. The purple boxes in the top half address the theme of teachers' professional learning needs, and the red boxes in the bottom half address supports for teacher agency, collaboration, and management. I want to share a vignette from one of the interviews that illustrates part of this map. Here's a quote from a district leader that really resonated with us on this. And I'll just pause here and give you a minute to read this before moving on and locating this on the map. So this vignette is in the report, and we'll also make these slides available later. So I highlighted on this slide 3 of the boxes with dark borders. Kind of illustrates how this vignette appears on this map. So this leader talks about maintaining the integrity of OpenSciEd enactment, but also identifying areas where teachers can have agency and a voice in how OpenSciEd is implemented at the district level. And this starts with the district's basic stance on enabling and supporting teachers. And this stance gives rise to a way to empower teachers and gives them a seat at the table. And then this empowerment in turn helps create teacher buy-in, which districts need in order to achieve deep OpenSciEd adoption. Here's a quick peek at the 2 other maps on the other broad outcomes. I'll help you look at these in more detail in the report. But again, I want to point out the themes that emerged from this mapping, specifically around improving teacher capacity, meeting students' needs, shifting classroom culture, enabling formative assessment practices, and teachers' access to assessment resources. I'm going to close by smashing all 3 of these maps together into this combined map that relates all 7 themes. So this larger map shows how meeting needs related to teacher support enables not just the broad outcome of adoption implementation, but it also enables other needs related to classroom and to assessment. And all 7 of these themes, I think, are things that science education systems can really improve on. And OpenSciEd, with its reach and ambitious vision, can create pressure for systems change in these ways. The last thing I want to point out is how teacher supports are furthest upstream in this flow. So meeting these needs is foundational to meeting other needs and achieving all the outcomes of interest to practitioners. So that concludes my quick report summary. And at this point, we're going to shift to hearing from our 4 panelists. All right. So our first one is Kate McNeill, professor at Boston College, and I'll just let her take it away.
All right. Oh, here we go. So first of all, I want to say that it was just a privilege to read this report, and I highly recommend that folks read it if you haven't gotten a chance to. I've had the opportunity to engage in research around OpenSciEd for the last 6 years, and I just cannot say enough about how it is such a fruitful and important space for us to do research as a science education community. So I just want to point out a couple things that I thought about in my 5 minutes. I got my timer on, so I don't go too long while I was thinking about this report. The first thing is just around this idea that the OpenSciEd research should be with schools and not on schools. I think it's so important for us as a research community to be thinking about it as partnership and collaboration, and there's so many opportunities there with teachers and leaders and students in terms of the research around that. And it really aligns with kind of a DBR focus around research that we're starting in these problems of practice and using those to motivate what we're trying to understand, as well as the tools and resources that we're building for this kind of community out there of leaders and teachers engaged in this work. So Kevin already mentioned this figure too, but it was one of the things that kind of jumped out to me when I was reading this report. And there's these 7 different areas here And when I look at those 7 areas, I see so many different opportunities for research within them, right? Both in terms of understanding what those areas are, as well as thinking about how we can design collaboratively tools and resources for teachers and leaders engaged in this work. So I'm just going to share kind of one example around that to kind of illustrate some of my thinking. I currently have an NSF grant with some colleagues that is focused on customizing curriculum materials. So understanding like how and why teachers customize curriculum, as well as developing tools and resources to help them in that work. And we're doing this in the context of OpenSciEd. So last year, as part of this work, one of the things that we did is we got to engage in a professional learning community with a group of teachers that were customizing the curriculum for their classrooms. And specifically, they were focused on student engagement and voice. This was an area that was really important for the teachers and that they were concerned about. So when I think about this research study in this PLC context, it brings together both kind of the adapting materials and the student engagement that are in this figure 2 in the context of a research study. And in doing the work, I feel like one of the things that I really learned from working with the teachers is this phrase like student engagement, student participation can mean very different things to different people. So part of the research was working together to unpack and kind of think about what does that mean and what exactly are we trying to design supports for. So this quote from Ms. G, Gabby, who was amazing, kind of highlights some of the things that we talked about as part of that PLC. So she said in part, realizing that I'm trying to get them to not only speak, but to share their opinions, share their perspectives, and show that we really value what they're saying. So like as part of the work together, part of the things Gabby talked about was no longer was it just about raising hands. It wasn't just that she wanted more hands. She wanted more student ideas and student voices and thinking about how she could really support that in our classroom. So I say that, and that I think these 7 areas are all really important for research, both to kind of develop nuance and understanding about what the challenge is and what we're trying to support, as well as thinking about tools that we could be doing around that. The other thing that I want to highlight that I think I've been thinking a lot about when I was reading it, could be in part of my current context and like some teacher strikes that have been going on, but there is this current era that we need to think about in terms of the deprofessionalization of teachers, and that teachers are at times being marginalized in our society. There's an article that recently came out. I'm going to put it in the chat. It is open source. I do recommend it. That talks a lot about how we need to think about as a research community, this marginalization of teachers and how a lot of teachers feel like their agency and authority and autonomy is be taken away. And that is in conflict with also this focus on equity-centered student classrooms. And we need to really be conscious of that and think about it in our work. And I think it's so important in all the research that we're doing that we're considering that. So to me, this links to some of the things Kevin said around teacher agency, which I do think comes out particularly in the vignettes in the report. And I just kind of want to share one other example from the NSF customized grant we're working on right now around that. So this year we had the privilege of working with about 70 middle school science teachers enacting OpenSciEd over the course of the year. We are literally just finishing collecting data, so I haven't analyzed it yet, but these are 2 quotes that kind of resonated with me when I was reading this report. So over the year, we did professional learning in person and virtually with these teachers. And I think one of the outcomes from it that has been really important is it's helped change their relationship with the curriculum. That when they started off, they felt like the curriculum was a script and it was a thing they had to follow in a certain way. But by engaging in this professional learning with us, they realized that it's a tool and it's a tool they should leverage, but they need to adapt and change in ways that make sense for their students, their schools, their classrooms. And I think this is really important for us to consider in all the research we're doing in the context of OpenSciEd, that we're thinking about this teacher curriculum relationship and how it's being positioned, and trying to help teachers see it as a resource that still sees them as professionals and still honors all the expertise they bring to the table. In 5 minutes and 22 seconds. So I'm 22 seconds over. I'll stop talking.
That was perfect. Thank you very much. Next is going to be Trish. I actually didn't know the order in advance because it was decided this morning based on people's slides. So Trish is going to go next. Trish is Chief Learning Officer, NSTA, and has been a program committee member for this project and friend for a couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, and I'm really honored to be here. I'm going to share a little video share my screen and share a video from a teacher. So I'd love for everybody just to think about how what she's sharing connects to what you've heard so far about the report.
If I were to have a discussion with administrators within my district and within, even just in my school itself, if we had a change and we didn't have quite the support for the professional learning for the OpenSciEd community or for any ongoing professional learning that would be curriculum-based, I would tell them that the biggest shift that I have seen in my teaching career over the course of the last 35 years has been with the opportunity to be in a professional learning environment. That has been ongoing, that has been with a community of learners, and that has had the greatest effect on any shift in teaching that I have had. I have brought back more changes to my teaching practice because of the opportunity of professional learning design when we are with a community and we are learning that curriculum together, especially in a situation where we are with people from districts from all over the place. We are very, very different populations that we're teaching, and even if it is the same type of population that we might be teaching, we are learning from one another. And I would be as bold to say that you are not going to have successful outcomes with your student population unless you give your teachers that opportunity to go outside of the classroom and really deeply dive into the curriculum with others.
So that was Anne Giuliano from Taunton Schools in Massachusetts. And I'm really excited that I get to follow Kate because that was Kate's group's professional learning that we recorded that interview from. So I love this graphic that I put there next to Anne, that of the top thing you see there, it's a daunting task, as Jim Ryan described at the beginning, that we're really changing our whole approach to classroom culture and what it means to engage in figuring out in the contemporary science education. And what we hear at NSTA all the time is that top picture is how it feels a lot of times from the very beginning. And then if you compare that to the bottom picture with those steps along the way and the multiple facets of support, that you change from I'll never make it to I got this. And when I was reading the report and especially looking at the maps, that's really what I thought a lot about. And for us at NSTA is being in the national space across many, many states, and also for leaders at CS Cubed or CCSSO, when they're thinking about multiple districts within a state, having that insight into what teachers and leaders said were the biggest needs and having the opportunity to take that multifaceted approach is really, really key to us meeting our vision. And then I have two other really quick examples. These, and Anne was speaking to OpenSciEd professional learning, just to be clear. And so I picked two districts that we've helped support, and thinking within the context of those multiple steps. Here's a rural district in Kentucky that they did the training for the launch for all of the units, but they also engaged in pretty robust instructional coaching. Each teacher who was teaching OpenSciEd engaged in 3 coaching cycles over the course of the school year. And over the course of the 3 years that we were supporting the district, we had a really distinct and intentional plan that we co-developed with them for their leadership to take over all of the areas that NSTA was providing support. So when we left, they had the infrastructure in place to be able to continue the work. And so it was the OpenSciEd fantastic professional learning that's provided that you can download, but also the other supports that particular district needed. And then this other school here, they didn't do the instructional coaching, but they engaged in virtual mentoring sessions for both the teachers and the leaders, in addition to a curriculum launch. there. So what I want to leave my little time here with is professional learning is foundational in the report. You're going to see it in lots and lots of places, but the menu of offerings within an ongoing, robust professional learning support system for teachers that also honors their agency and their professionalism is it's just ripe for future research, innovation, and development. There's so much more that we can do together with this great curriculum and the professional learning resources at the core. So I'll pass it back to you, Kevin.
I guess I'll start. Hey, I'm Holly Sullivan, and I am the science coordinator or content specialist in Richland School District 2 in Columbia, South Carolina. And we don't have the same supports and money and also NGSS standards that we're seeing and you're all talking about and some of the other states. And so there's been a lot of challenges for those of us who want to implement this really high quality instructional materials. And so some of what I do is I work with science teachers in my district. Actually spent the past 2 days doing professional learning with teachers who have never looked at OpenSciEd. And so shout out to the professional learning people for OpenSciEd who have actually listened to us and said, well, we don't have time for a 4-day launch. So can we do a 2-day launch? And I'm able to modify that. And thankfully I've been had a chance to become an OpenSciEd facilitator. That makes such a difference for me to be able to help my teachers. And I also work with other coordinators in their state. So I'm going to go to the next slide because I just want to mention something about when you don't have autonomy at the district level to force teachers to implement something, you kind of have to go the other direction. And so I just wanted to share, to think about the arrows going a different way on this map, to say, like, what if we start with showing the teachers doing some professional learning, taking them through an anchoring phenomena routine so they can see how important it is and how engaging it is and how different it is to teach with a storyline versus teaching with a traditional curriculum. And this has worked in a previous district, and you just have to find the right teachers in the right place to say, okay, I'll try it, and it gains momentum. And so when I say both ways, if you're partnering with the teachers, the district level, and having them say, no, this is what we want to do, then they're actually making it a priority for the district. And it's exciting for me in a previous district that we were able to get there. But teachers have to see other teachers doing it, and admin have to see teachers having success. And that's kind of how I've been able to implement OpenSciEd. But I've also had to be, when you're talking about teacher autonomy, I have to be okay with, like, okay, so they don't want to do it in this order, or they want to, I have to meet the teachers where they are to say, like, oh, well, I'll try this assessment, but I also need to do this other assessment because we have state testing. And so having those conversations without being pushy with teachers, it's taken me a while to get there, but that's how I get teachers on board. But then we have to be ready as district leaders to provide professional learning when we can, and also make sure that they have all the resources they need, and that they collaborate. You have to create the opportunities for teachers in the school and then across the district to collaborate, talk about this is going well or it's not going well. So, I want to highlight from the report, they've really named the things that I've heard from my teachers that is really important to have that professional learning to get started and sustain it, to have the materials, and teachers absolutely have to have time to plan and to reflect. And that's probably the hardest part. So we finished school last Friday, so I was able to pay teachers to come in today and yesterday to do professional learning, but I can't do that during the school year, and it's only for teachers who want to come in. So it's a real slow process, but it works really well for what I needed to happen. And then assessment's always going to be a challenge when there's state testing for certain grade levels. So, another issue that you're going to hear from a lot of different school districts is how do you get teachers onboarded quickly? So we're churning through teachers. We're getting teachers from other countries, and they're fabulous. They come in with great content knowledge, but this is a completely different way of teaching. So that's a challenge for me, but also a challenge for teachers in the schools that are trying to help have a team effort. So anyway, there's a lot of things to think about, and I think the report really highlighted some things that I'm hearing, but also made me think about other things that we could be looking at for research, particularly in the states where we don't realize that, like, folks may not know how much in South Carolina we're trying really hard to shift to this type of storylining, but we're not going to have that same connection because there's none of the field testers were in our state. And so it's all like word of mouth and what are you doing in your district? So I love what the report is saying, but I'll talk a little bit later about like some ideas I have for other research that it's going to support states that are not NGSS. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And I apologize for not introducing you. I forgot to take myself off mute, of course, as we do on these Zoom meetings. And I was also thanking Trish for bringing us a bonus discussant and for those nice examples of emerging models for supporting teachers. So thanks very much, Holly. And I think we're going to Angela.
Thank you, Kevin. So I've been reflecting on all that's been accomplished with OpenSciEd, and the thoughtful research to guide next steps is really impressive. So first of all, I want to say how proud I am to be part of the OpenSciEd community. And as some of you may know, at the Hewlett Foundation, one of our core areas of work is open education. And this is because we believe every learner should have what they need to learn. So we invest in students, educators, scholars to create open and collaborative tools and practices like OpenSciEd. And we believe these help prepare students to become leaders in their communities. And I think we're at an important moment now in science education where the next generation science standards and related state standards have been in play for some time. And there's growing recognition that we're not doing justice to science learning if classroom experiences are not also connecting with students' interests and identities, and if they're not also engaging students in critical thinking and collaboration. And if we want teachers authentically inviting students' questions to drive learning, we can't expect them to follow a script in the book, as you've heard my colleagues talk about on the panel already. So I see this approach to science teaching and learning really providing a nice framework to realize the intention of OER. And when done well, it creates the conditions for every student to have agency in their own learning, for teachers to have agency as professionals in their practice. And it's been really cool to watch how OpenSciEd has brought this to life, from the orientation around the driving questions and centering student reasoning to the work they're doing to spread these high quality practices with science teachers around the country. And I think part of the reason for this early success is that OpenSciEd focuses on community first, simultaneously working on curriculum and professional learning and developing partnerships with states and districts. And this is really what open education is about. It's not just about putting an open license on materials. It's about building these communities of practice that support educators in using their expertise to localize content. It's about teachers sharing what's working and not working with each other so that their students have more meaningful and engaging experiences. And it's super interesting to see how OpenSciEd is playing out when it comes to implementation. And I thought the report provided some fascinating insights around student engagement, teacher agency, constraints in working in education systems today. So I just wanted to highlight a few areas that have got me thinking now, and I'm going to continue to be thinking about after today. But first is that materials adaptation is a big deal. And we have to pay attention to this, particularly if we want equitable access to learning for students who are multilingual learners or who may have disabilities. And I know this is something that the OpenSciEd team has been working on for some time, and clearly there's more that we can be doing to make sure teachers have the supports they need so that each of their students connects with the core ideas of and practices in science. And along these lines, I think continuing to figure out how to support teachers in applying their professional expertise to adapt the materials is going to be really important. And again, this is one of the benefits of OER. Because OpenSciEd has an open license, teachers don't have to worry about copyright when they're changing materials and hopefully sharing their adaptations with their colleagues. So they should be made aware of this, fully supported in this through professional learning and how to make productive adaptations that are both responsive to their students and that also maintain the integrity or intention of the evidence-based design of OpenSciEd. And this relates to another point in the report about the role of districts in supporting these practices. As you've heard my colleagues talk about, teachers and students can't fully experience the benefits of open instructional materials if the materials are treated rigidly like any other curriculum that's typically adopted. This shouldn't feel like something that teachers shouldn't feel like this is something that's being done to them, but rather something that they have voice in shaping. And I really appreciated how the report speaks to the need for district leaders to create these avenues for collaborative sense-making about how to teach science. If we want students to experience agency, teachers need to experience agency too. And so the last point I want to make is about what the report alludes to as an opportunity to promote broad systems change. And I think that's exactly right. To me, OpenSciEd creates an opportunity to push the boundaries around how things have been and provide a path toward a new way of teaching and learning, to reculture the classroom and systems as Jim talked about. So I want us to build on this foundation and challenge assessment and grading practices that are purely evaluative. Let's figure out what it takes to fully support phenomena-based science instruction, and frankly, to support these kinds of changes in disciplines beyond science. And let's align practices and policies so that students see themselves and their potential through what they're learning in school. As both a funder and a researcher, this is what excites me, and this is why I'm so excited to see what's next for OpenSciEd. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Angela. So the final segment of our agenda is a panel discussion involving all 5 of our guests. And we've prepared some questions for them that we hope will enable them to go a little more deeply into some of the issues raised in the report, and also to have a little interactive back and forth about it. I'm going to start with a question. So Angela is going to have to jump off a little early. We really appreciate you setting aside this time in between your agenda today. So, whenever you need to slip away discreetly, please go ahead. We really thank you for being here. But I'm going to start with a question that Angela maybe can kick off the discussion, and we can bounce it around among the panel. I'm interested in, how do these insights extend beyond OpenSciEd to other open materials? And maybe what does not extend to other open materials? What may be OpenSciEd specific? Angela, do you want to jumpstart that?
Yeah, sure. Well, the findings very much resonate with what we're seeing around other open education programs. We actually commissioned an evaluation of open education programs, and we see similar results. And I can share a link to those findings in a minute in the chat. But just to highlight a few examples, first we found that realizing the full benefits of open curricula requires continuous professional learning for teachers that's aligned to the curriculum. And this is especially true for OER like OpenSciEd, because as all of us on this call know, that these programs require teachers to examine their own practices and make pedagogical shifts towards student agency and active learning, to understand what it means to enact culturally responsive and sustaining practices. So professional learning is key, and teachers seem to be more successful when districts are able to allocate more time and resources there. Another finding that parallels is around some of the tensions that developers and district leaders experience in promoting the adaptability of OER. So figuring out how to do this while maintaining the integrity around the design principles of curricula. And so I imagine that's going to be an ongoing element that we have to navigate with these programs. And then the third piece I'd highlight is that we found that the demands and constraints of systems matter too. So teachers sometimes struggled with the disconnect between realizing the full potential of creating collaborative learning environments with OER in the context of high stakes assessments. And so Kevin, you asked about a distinction or opportunity, or what might be different with OpenSciEd. I do wonder if that pressure is even more intense with like math and English language arts programs that have the more frequent testing, and there might be more flexibility in the science space, but I don't know, the whole accountability systems, they raise challenges in multiple ways. But I think in short, there's a lot of parallels between what you've what's emerged from the research coming out around OpenSciEd and what we're seeing with other OER programs.
Let's go in a different direction. This is for everyone. Maybe look forward 10 years, right? And what are more districts doing, or even states, right? What are they doing more of 5 to 10 years from now that they're not doing right now in the way of teacher supports, assessment, attention to equity, adoption, and other things? Trish, do you want to start on this one?
Sure, thank you. So I knew about this question beforehand, and I had thought about it a lot. So I'm going to share a little bit of that thinking, but I'm going to add in, I'm really excited to read Emily's article that Kate shared about teachers as professionals. So I'm going to start with that theme a little bit, and it got me thinking. It's something that Dr. Stephen Pruitt, early when he was cheerleading for the NGSS, that he talked a lot about with the new standards when he would speak nationally about how important it was that we continue to center on that conversation as teachers, as professionals. And with that, in most other professions that you can think of, there is an expectation for continued professional learning throughout the course of your career, and an emphasis on that. And I hope that in 5 to 10 years, there's a lot more access for sustained professional learning for educators at all of the stakeholder levels of the system. One of the things I had a lot of gratitude about, Kevin, is in this report, multiple stakeholders were part of your process, and that sustained professional learning support is absent in a lot of places at all levels of the system for stakeholders. And the other piece that I would add to that is what we call the personalization of that professional learning. And that doesn't mean it needs to be different for everybody and for every group and for every context, but there should be access points that are that really align with whatever the district or state or school priorities are, because we know that we are a nation of predominantly local control when it comes to those pieces. And that is something that I've also been really excited about, the OpenSciEd approach and all of this conversation we've heard today about adapting the curriculum, but also Holly talked about adapting the professional learning. The only thing I'll end with that is that when we think again and center that professional, teachers as professionals, like with OpenSciEd, we want them to have support for all 6 of the middle school units, not just the first one with a real 4-day launch. And I think that we're still struggling in some areas that to get out of that one and done type mindset. And even beyond, like if you an investment, the example I shared was 3 years, that particular school is still investing in science professional learning, and they're now 5 years out. And so that continued support for teachers as professionals is what I'll start with, Kevin. Thanks.
I'll build on some of what Trish said. I love everything you just said. I would love for in 5 to 10 years for teachers to have more regular professional learning opportunities. That would be amazing. When you were talking, I was thinking about like going out in classrooms. I feel like I have seen a shift. I am obviously in Massachusetts, so I realize there is variation across the country, but my hope is that in 5 to 10 years, regardless of if they're using OpenSciEd or a different science curriculum, that the science instruction is more phenomena-based, and it is more driven by students' ideas and questions, and that like those are characteristics that get carried regardless of what curriculum a school is using, because I think they are becoming more prevalent in how we talk and think about science instruction. And OpenSciEd is a part of that, I think, in a really important way. Another thing that I think, going back to the article I put in the chat, I do feel like there are system level pressures that like we need to push on. Like we are in a challenging space right now. Teacher turnover is high. Teachers aren't going into teaching. Like we need to think about how, as a science ed community, we can help lift up and support teachers and encourage other people to go into teaching, right? In the last 10 years, the number of individuals going into teaching has decreased by 33%. That is not a trend we want to see continue going. So just trying to think about, as a community, like, how do we lift up science teachers and all the amazing things they do and help support them to stay in teaching, and encourage other folks to want to go into teaching?
There's a couple areas that I would love to see the market move. One is we have a few different derivatives now, but I would expect to see 10, 15 different derivatives in 5 to 10 years of OpenSciEd, and some would be very state specific, and some would be theme specific, embedding computer science, for instance. As well as distributors making market-based decisions that would make them maybe more that might embed more teacher support, or other ways in which others can always make the materials better. I would also hope that what we see in these derivatives are districts moving in a direction that gets away from, we adopt something for about 5 to 7 years, and then we move on to the next program. Rather, since these materials can be made your own, you wouldn't dare pry them out of a teacher's hands in 5 to 7 years, because their own thinking and their own values are embedded deeply, and beliefs are embedded deeply within those materials. And so I think as the further we can move down this path of these materials are really in live in a variety of forms in which so that teachers can find the things that they most value within them, the better off we will be, and which also allows us to move away from these recurring cycles of adoption and professional learning, and that the professional learning builds year after year after year, instead of having to be remade with new curriculum in these shorter cycles.
All right, I'm going to go to a different question. This is, again, something I think everyone can share on. I'm interested in what things that were described in the report do you see a lot of in your day-to-day interactions with OpenSciEd, and what have you seen that was not in there, right? So one of the things, we heard from a good number of practitioners, but there are some things that may not have been voiced in the conversations we had, right? What were some of the things that were not in there, and maybe some emerging solutions that you've seen that were not raised in the report? Holly, would you be able to start on this one?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. I picked 3 of the findings that really jumped out to me that that I hear a lot and see a lot. So like in finding 1, there was a focus on teacher planning reflection time. We've already talked about that, but we can't discount that. Teachers, especially their first time going through, first time using OpenSciEd, or first time with a new unit, they just got to have that time, and it's just not really built in to regular contract time for teachers. And so, how do you create that time? And so I highlight that that's in this study, and I'm like, that is true. And that's something we need to be talking about. And then in finding 4, that access and benefit of professional learning, I think that drives so much of the success of implementation of OpenSciEd, either in a classroom or in a school and in a district. Just having the professional, like even this the first day of a launch, when you go through the anchoring phenomena routine, if a teacher's never seen that, it explodes their brains. They really, yeah, Kate. I mean, like it just changes how they see themselves as teachers and their students as learners, but it needs to be backed up. And again, that's there in the report. And I hear that a lot, and I'm seeing that a lot. And then, you mentioned, I think Jim was talking about like the teacher across the hall. Totally agree with that. So how do you help teachers in the building, help other teachers kind of get the professional learning they need, or at least the support, the collaboration to kind of get started and help each other. And then the one that I hear, and I'm sure everybody hears, is in finding 6 is the formative assessments. How do we get grades in the grade book? And then access to assessment resources. And are the assessments in the OpenSciEd going to provide my students the background they need so they're successful on whatever state testing? State testing is so big, and yet it's not. It's kind of a weird thing. And the schools get judged by their scores, but it is teaching OpenSciEd going to get the kids ready for whatever the test is. And the test is not going to look like what our assessments look like in OpenSciEd. That's just a reality. And so that's stuff that I hear from my teachers, and I'm sure all of y'all have heard. And so one thing that I want to highlight and notice that it was mentioned in the study, but I want to talk a little bit more about is one of the limitations was the network diversity. So the teachers that were surveyed and the teachers that were, or the practitioners that were in the focus groups, they really did kind of come from the states and from, and I didn't see that, but like you noticed you wrote this in the report, so I'm just highlighting it. So we're not really getting the broad feedback from teachers who are kind of doing this grassroots. And so that term grassroots could be a district grassroots where we don't have a lot of money, but we're trying to implement it anyway. So that's something that I agree that needs to be kind of looked at and have kind of some ideas for that. And the other thing that we're going to have to be talking about, Kate already talked about this, we're in a really rough time with teacher turnover, and it's everywhere. And so I would be interested to see if implementing OpenSciEd and having support makes teachers want to stay in the classroom. Like that is something to think about, because we have teachers leaving because they don't feel supported, or things are crazy. But I'm wondering about what that looks like. If we can provide it, if that makes a difference, that's a selling point for districts and schools. So that would be nice to see, to learn more about that. And also I'm going to suggest with the research that we start, if there's a chance to reach out to states like South Carolina that are really not highlighted, but we're trying. And so, how can we partner with researchers, even in our state, or with people working on their PhDs in our districts, to look and see how OpenSciEd makes a difference in student engagement and student success and teacher retention. And so there's just so many areas for research that that I can see that I would love to be a part of and love to talk about more.
Holly, your point about like whether or not it helps keep teachers in teaching, 2 different examples popped in my head that totally contradict each other, which means I think it would be a really fascinating area of research. One, a teacher, Michael, who talked about it totally like rejuvenated him and excited him and made him like want to be a teacher longer. And he's doing amazing things in his classroom. Another teacher, Shilpa, who now loves OpenSciEd, but we had her on a panel because she hated it her first 2 years, like just pure hatred there. And it was hard, and she didn't feel like she was doing it well, and it took time and all the things. And then there was a shift, right? Like she got the professional learning, she got the support, she was in a community, and eventually like it made sense to her, and it became easier because she had taught these units before, and she knew where the storyline was going, and she knew what student idea to pick up on, and where you could go fast and where you could go slow and all the things. But it's interesting because I think teaching this is harder than teaching a lot of science curriculum. So if you jump into it without support, I could see it not going well, and maybe then you don't stay in teaching, versus if you are in a very supportive environment and you end up seeing your kids more engaged and excited about science than you have before, that could be a way that makes you like want to keep staying in science. But I think that would be a fascinating area of research.
I want to mention that the district I'm in now is my first year here. 2 years ago, they tried, quote unquote, to implement. They just bought the kits, took them to the teachers and said, and now I'm having to overcome that because that just burned teachers out. Oh, it's a script. Oh, I don't want anybody tell me what to do. And oh, like the kids hated it, whatever. And I'm like, oh my God. So I'm having to I spent the whole year going, just give me a chance, just give me a chance. And so it's so important to not screw it up to start with.
Kevin, I can jump in with a little different notice that if you haven't had a chance to read the report, or if you didn't notice this, I've read the report several times now. And so today when I was reading, something that really stood up to me was, I'm not going to get this exact quote, but talking about the leaders that you spoke to and had in the survey, looking at the needs of students across classrooms, like that was a conclusion from a lot of what they shared, and the teachers looking at the needs of students in their classroom and how important both of those perspectives are. And then in the survey results, that for teachers, we saw one of the highest priority needs being the student engagement, but for leaders, it was more of the adaptation, which is something that we've talked about today. So that the report has so much there that we can use in analyzing and planning, and also looking to the future in research, that I just wanted to call that out.
Thank you. I'll add to that too. In our conversations with teachers in our interviews, especially, we also heard two sides of this, right? There was an element of the extent to which districts were very top down in the way they implemented. And this relates to the teacher agency piece, right? That teachers, it was sort of forced upon teachers, and that did not help create buy-in on their part. There's another thing a lot of districts said, which is depending on, what perspective a teacher brings on science education, right? Especially with teachers who have been doing it their way. They have their own way of doing it for 25 years. And that's hard to shift as opposed to younger teachers who maybe have been, they've had their training in the NGSS era. And so they're very open to this model, even with the additional work. Any others before I go to another question? All right. This is, I think, overlapping with the last one. What are some emerging solutions that bridge the gap between what OpenSciEd PD should look like and district's capacity to implement it, right? We heard a couple from our panelists, a couple of sort of examples of things that teachers or districts are doing to bridge that gap. I'm wondering, what are some other things that didn't come up in the report that you're seeing little pockets of, little innovations maybe that are being tried out? Kate, do you have anything like this that you can?
I have thoughts and potential, but I definitely do not have a strong answer around it. When Trish was showing the video from Anne, I wrote down a quote that Anne said. She said, "Teachers need the opportunity to deeply dive into the curriculum with others." I think that with others is really important, especially if you want to help teachers shift their vision and beliefs in ways they haven't thought before. So as we think about the constraints that are out there, knowing that schools and districts don't necessarily have the time, the money, the resources for a 4-day launch, and then 2 days on each of the next 5 units, trying to think about how do we create opportunities that they get to work with others, and that it takes time. It's never going to be a 1-hour webinar is the solution for your OpenSciEd professional learning needs, right? That can be a taste and an intro of something to come, but it's not the solution. So I feel as a community, we need to be thinking more about the professional learning as it's designed, is there a way to use it more module? Is there a way to design it in different capacities where teachers are working in professional learning communities around it? Are those professional learning communities in schools or are they virtual? Is it a combo? So just trying to think about within the constraints of the system, what are other ways we can help them to dig deeply into the curriculum with others, and have kind of multiple opportunities around that. Holly and Trish might have more specific examples, but that's what I was thinking of when we were talking.
I love the Washington State cohort program. If you get a chance to look at, and that's William Barr's part of that, and somebody else, I'm sure. And like that would be my dream in South Carolina, is to have like these cohorts of teachers that literally just collaborating virtually online. How's it going for you? What's going for me? And how can I help you? And I mean, that's just so beautiful. But it takes a lot of work. But I mean, that is doing it with other teachers. I think that would be really cool.
Yeah, the only thing that I'll add is actually something that was on Kate's slide really early on. That's a piggyback off of that, Holly, and is that PLCs are a structure within schools that have been leveraged very, very well for a long time, and in a lot of places mandatory to happen. And so having some really good examples of how that particular piece can be leveraged along with the existing OpenSciEd professional learning recommendations for that embedded piece that is part of the CS Cube Science professional learning standards, I think would be a place that would appeal to a lot of districts and teachers in a lot of places, and something that they are already somewhat familiar with. So it might not feel as intimidating.
I would just add there is another part of the support that we try and provide for teachers, and that is our teacher guides for every unit. Unfortunately, they're quite daunting as currently structured. I mean, they're, depending on the unit, 400 and something pages per unit for a 4 to 6 week unit, and everything the teacher needs to teach the materials is in there, but they won't find it in the time that they have allocated to prepare for that lesson. And the more that we can dovetail all of that great content that is in that teacher guide with professional learning and organize it in such a way in which it becomes friendlier and is delivered in a manner that helps us or helps the teacher in the time that they have, the better that we will then support teachers. And I'm hopeful that maybe AI can help us understand what the teachers need, when they need it, and pull it out of all of this great content that the development consortia have put together for the teachers, whether it be in PL, whether it be in the teacher guide, etc. I think I think there's promise there.
I was just going to ask, what promising ways do you think there are to do this? AI was, you preempted that response with AI. Are there any other like sort of seeds of ideas that help with this? Or are there some of the publishers or intermediaries, do they have ways of approaching this?
This I will take it in a little different direction in that I just mentioned the AI piece, but one of the ideas that we had when we started this work was that if we can lower the cost of materials, then we might be able to encourage districts and schools to redirect funds that had been allocated for curricular materials to teacher support, professional learning, coaching, whatever it might be. And we've yet to see that. but that doesn't mean that it's still not a hope and a possible promising practice. That if we can overcome or start to address that barrier, the cost barrier of teacher support, then we might start to see whether it be time allocated for PLCs or professional learning or hiring of coaches. I remain hopeful that that's a direction we will see in the future.
Danny, thanks for your response to that. Would you like to say just a couple more words on that?
I really don't have anything to say about solutions. We are very aware of the challenge of the teachers face in working with these materials. So I really would just say that we are in the process of formulating the questions to be asked and studied and some potential solutions. But and Jim, Ryan, and I have talked about this, and I do see the potential of AI, but I also think there are ways to organize information and condense information that could be really helpful for teachers.
Thanks.
I guess I'll say, I mean, I'd like to say in public that part of the reason the materials look the way they do is because we have been subject to review processes by organizations that maybe say that they understand and care about usability, but don't necessarily do so in a practical standpoint. So I think part of the solution is not to change the resources that we have, because they're critical for being recognized as high quality, but to think of other additional things that can make it easier for teachers to wade through all of that. Like everything in there is being used by some teacher under some circumstances.
But there's this question of like, how do you get it and how do you help them find what they need? It makes
Yeah,
me
how do you prevent it from being an obstacle more often than it's an affordance?
Susie Loper's on this, who's at Lawrence Hall of Science. Susie, it's reminding me of, we had a grant together like 10 years ago, where it was focused on multimedia educative curriculum materials around argumentations. And the teachers, in one version, the teachers had like multiple choice questions at the beginning where they would answer a question, and depending on how they responded, it would push a different educative feature. And they were more likely to watch those videos and use those features than just a general one embedded, right? Because I think it like addressed a need or something that they are interested in. So I do feel like, I don't know if it's AI or if it's some other use of technology, but I think there's a way to help teachers feel like they're getting what they need versus just like this gigantic Google document or PDF that I'm not quite sure how to go into.
So I think maybe I'll bring us to a close. I want to thank our panelists for being here. Everyone who took the time to attend. We'll be sending out a form to the community. We have a newsletter that hopefully you're subscribed to. And if not, let me know if you want to be subscribed to it. And we sent out a form to everyone to give us feedback on the report, right? There's a draft watermark on the report, and that's there on purpose. That's not, we didn't forget to remove it. That's to communicate to you that we see this as still an evolving document. And we'd really like the feedback of the community on it. To incorporate into a revision, which we would release later on in the year. So you can look for that feedback form, or you can send your feedback directly to me. My contact information is in the report as well. So any way you'd like to give us that feedback so that we can improve it, we're very open to that. And that was about it. So thanks again, everyone. I hope you have a great summer and hope to see you around. Thanks for being here.